A General Election by Oliver Goldsmith. The English are at present employed in celebrating a feast which becomes general every 7th year. The Parliament of a nation is then dissolved and another appointed to be chosen. This solemnity falls infinitely short of our Feast of the Lanterns in magnificence and splendor. It is also surpassed by others of the East in unanimity and pure devotion. But no festival in the world can compare with it for eating. Their eating indeed amazes me. Had I 500 heads, and were each head furnished with brains, yet would all be insufficient to compute the number of cows, pigs, geese, and turkeys with which, upon this occasion, die for the good of their country. To say the truth, eating seems to make a grand ingredient in all English parties of zeal, business, or amusement. When a church is to be built, or a hospital endowed, the directors assemble, and instead of consulting upon it, they eat upon it, by which means the business goes forward with success. When the poor are to be relieved, the officers appointed to dole out public charity assemble and eat upon it. Nor has it ever been known that they filled the bellies of the poor till they had previously satisfied their own. But in the election of magistrates, the people seem to exceed all bounds. The merits of a candidate are often measured by the number of his treats. His constituents assemble, eat upon him, and lend their applause, not to his integrity or sense, but to the quantities of his beef and brandy. And yet I could forgive these people their plentiful meals on this occasion, as it is extremely natural for every man to eat a great deal when he gets it for nothing. But what amazes me is that all this good living in no way contributes to improve their good humor. On the contrary, they seem to lose their temper as they lose their appetites. Every morsel they swallow and every glass they pour down serves to increase their animosity. Many an honest man, before as harmless as a tame rabbit, when loaded with a single election dinner, has become more dangerous than a charged culverin. Upon one of these occasions, I have actually seen a bloody-minded man-milliner sally forth at the head of a mob, determined to face a desperate pastry cook who was general of the opposite party. But you must not suppose they are without a pretext for thus beating each other. On the contrary, no man here is so uncivilized as to beat his neighbor without producing very sufficient reasons. One candidate, for instance, treats with gin, a spirit of their own manufacture. Another always drinks brandy imported from abroad. Brandy is a wholesome liquor, gin a liquor wholly their own. This, then, furnishes an obvious cause of quarrel, whether it be most reasonable to get drunk with gin or get drunk with brandy. The mob meets upon the debate, fight themselves sober, and then draw off to get drunk again and charge for another encounter. So that the English may now properly be said to be engaged in war, since while they are subduing their enemies abroad, they are breaking each other's heads at home. Dr. Primrose in Prison by Oliver Goldsmith. The next morning I communicated to my wife and children the scheme I had planned of reforming the prisoners, which they received with universal disapprobation, alleging the impossibility and impropriety of it, adding that my endeavors would no way contribute to their amendment, but might possibly disgrace my calling. "Excuse me," I returned. "These people, however fallen, are still men, and that is a very good title to my affections. Good counsel rejected returns to enrich the giver's bosom. And though the instruction I communicate may not mend them, yet it will assuredly mend myself. If these wretches, my children, were princes, there would be thousands ready to offer their ministry. But in my opinion, the heart that is buried in a dungeon is as precious as that seated upon a throne. Yes, my treasures, if I can mend them, I will. Perhaps they will not all despise me. Perhaps I may catch up even one from the gulf, and that will be great gain. For there is upon earth a gem so precious as the human soul." Thus saying, I left them and descended to the common prison, where I found the prisoners very merry, expecting my arrival, and each prepared with some jail trick to play upon the doctor. Thus, as I was going to begin, one turned my wig awry, as if by accident, and then asked my pardon. A second, who stood at some distance, had a knack of spitting through his teeth, which fell in showers upon my book. A third would cry Amen in such an affected tone as gave the rest great delight. A fourth had slyly picked my pocket of its spectacles. But there was one whose trick gave more universal pleasure than the rest. For observing the manner in which I had disposed my books upon the table before me, he very dexterously displaced one of them, and put an obscene jest book of his own in the place. However, I took no notice of all this that this mischievous group of little beings could do, but went on, perfectly sensible that what was ridiculous in my attempt would excite mirth only the first or second time, while what was serious would be permanent. My design succeeded, and in less than 6 days some were penitent, and all attentive. It was now that I applauded my perseverance and address, at thus giving sensibility to wretches divested of every moral feeling, and now began to think of doing them temporal services also, by rendering their situation somewhat more comfortable. Their time had hitherto been divided between famine and excess, tumultuous riot and bitter repining. Their only employment was quarrelling among each other, playing at cribbage, and cutting tobacco stoppers. From this last mode of idle industry, I took the hint of setting such as chose to work at cutting pegs for tobacconists and shoemakers, the proper wood being bought by general subscription, and when manufactured, sold by my appointment, so that each earned something every day, a trifle indeed, but sufficient to maintain him. I did not stop here, but instituted fines for the punishment of immorality, and rewards for peculiar industry. Thus, in less than a fortnight, I had formed them into something social and humane, and had the pleasure of regarding myself as a legislator who had brought men from their native ferocity into friendship and obedience.